Hi everyone, today I'm going to read out my sample response for the IB English A Literature Paper 2 Practice paper. And so the guiding question here we're given is compare and contrast how two writers establish the foundations of tragedy in the opening moments of two texts. And here I'm going to read out my response. Please view it as a reference, but certainly don't copy it word for word. So let's go. Foundations of tragic works of literature in the opening moments are crucial for their reception amongst the audience and the progression of the Aristotelian tragic plot. Specifically, the exposition, rising action, and moments of tension are central to the plays. Macbeth by William Shakespeare and A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Both tragic plays of their times, Macbeth was set in the 11th century Scotland, featuring the corruptive nature of power, whilst A Streetcar Named Desire was set in 1940s in New Orleans, Louisiana, the United States of America, that explores the ramifications of brutal desires. Both prominent playwrights of their times, Shakespeare effectively utilizes an impressive array of dramatic devices in order to establish the play for conflicts to come, whereas Williams relies heavily on elements of plastic theatre, such as extensive stage directions, in addition to conventional literary techniques, to characterize the protagonist Blanche and the antagonist Stanley. The setup of tragic plays involves establishing a setting and clarifying characters, whereas Williams chiefly dedicates this important section to construct the complexity of characters. Shakespeare, on the other hand, takes a more atmospheric approach by prolonging suspense. In Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth, starts off in media res as the witches anaphorically chant "Fair is foul and foul is fair." Here, the effective use of alliteration captures the idea that good is seen bad and bad is seen good. The early conflation of good and evil underscores the heart of the play, in which the eponymous tragic hero Macbeth blunders into the realm of the evil as he assassinates the widely revered King Duncan. By setting up a blatant moral confusion, Shakespeare attempts to prolong the suspense and thus to bewilder the audience. Contrastingly, the opening of A Streetcar Named Desire features Stanley bleating out "Stella baby" as he heaves the package of meat at her, Stella also being Stanley's wife. In this moment, Stanley passes the meat to Stella despite her protest, after which she accepts cravenly. Williams' stylistic choice of employing stage directions as opposed to Shakespeare's pure imagery allows critical context to be incorporated in the play. In this case, Stanley's domineering tone in "Stella Baby", coupled with the sexual connotations of meat, implies Stanley's overt expression of sexual dominance over Stella, characterizing his masculinity and juxtaposing it to her femininity. Instead of rejecting, Stella actively embraces Stanley's idiosyncrasies, highlighting the immense power of desire that underpins the entire play. Despite being a short exchange, the wealth of information embedded inside the stage direction in this instance amazes the audience, as it clearly stipulates the progression of the play. In comparison, the eponymous tragic hero Macbeth's remark of "so foul and fair a day" echoes the witch's conflation. By using pathetic fallacy coupled with seemingly inadvertent repetition of fair and foul, Shakespeare implies a mysterious transcendental connection between the witches and Macbeth. In fact, the witches are a metonymy of the evil, and thus Macbeth's association with them exudes an ominous atmosphere. The dramatic irony of this moment thus elicits in the audience a sense of suspense. Furthermore, whilst the rising action in A Streetcar Named Desire appears spontaneous and driven by characters, Shakespeare chooses a different approach by emphasizing the premeditated nature, driven partially by the pervasive supernatural powers. In the opening scene, Lady Macbeth goads her husband Macbeth into murdering King Duncan as she instructs him to look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Here, the author's use of animalistic diction in serpent exudes a serpentine imagery of vivid deceit. Since serpents are often associated with ambush from a camouflage position, Lady Macbeth tells Macbeth to act evil whilst appearing innocent. Here, Shakespeare purposefully employs the sly tone to demonstrate the premeditated nature of rising actions that lead to Macbeth's hamartia. Pondering upon the planned cover-up of the regicidal crime, the audience is left with a fearful mood as suspension intensifies. In contrast, Williams highlights the role of spontaneity and intrinsic dispositions of characters as a driving force of the play. Early in scene 1 of A Streetcar Named Desire, when Stanley meets Blanche for the first time, Stanley rudely interrupts Blanche's small talk steichomythia by telling her, "Now let's cut the bebop." Williams' deliberate employment of high-modality imperative language serves to characterize Stanley as spontaneous and irrational. By portraying a surprisingly blatant confrontation in their first acquaintance, the author draws on the unpredictable and capricious nature of future conflicts, implying that Stanley could commit the tragic act at any moment, furthering a sense of unease in the audience. The rising action often materializes itself in the form of tension in the play. Both Macbeth and Williams highlight the significance of masculinity and its equivalence to dominance in their respective play. Just as Macbeth transiently decides to steer away from committing a murder he previously proposed, Lady Macbeth goads him into continuing the deed by suggesting that she would have plucked her nipple and dashed the brain out of her newborn if she had sworn to do it. Shakespeare's choice of using grotesque imagery here as a symbol of masculinity, or rather lack of femininity and maternity, exudes a menacing tone. The fact that Lady Macbeth had embraced masculinity in order to appear more powerful than Macbeth per se associates masculinity with power. Similarly, in A Streetcar Named Desire, Stanley is described as a richly feathered male bird among hens. The metaphor of richly feathered connotes masculinity, since it is a distinguishing feature of the male bird. Additionally, the bird imagery can be transposed into the human world, where Stanley is portrayed as possessing an atavistic desire for sexual conquerorship. By characterizing him as the one who seeks sexual dominance, the audience is able to take a slight glimpse into his fundamental flaw, paving the way for his eventual tragic act. Overall, the two playwrights effectively use the opening scenes and foundations of tragedy to further the plot lines. On the one hand, Shakespeare favours the grand overarching theme of the supernatural fate and atmosphere in the advancement of Macbeth, whereas Williams relies too heavily on what appears to be the character's own flaws. But on the other hand, both authors entertain the theme of masculinity and its equivalence to power dynamics between characters. Each playwright has his distinct style and approach to establishing tragedy. Nevertheless, Shakespeare's Macbeth is more effective than A Streetcar Named Desire, regarding its flexibility to interpretation due to the paucity of stage directions. In any case, both authors argue that purposeful construction of the foundations of tragedy in the opening scenes is crucial for the effective communication of ideas.